Our breaking news, officials now say the gunman who ambushed a Philadelphia police officer confessed he acted out of loyalty to ISIS. And 2 Middle East refugees to the United States now facing federal terrorism charges. We're talking to Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard about all of this and a lot more. But first, a U.S. ground attack missile often used to target terrorists abroad has now wound up in a very, very wrong place. Our global affairs correspondent, Elise Labott, is joining us. Elise, this is very alarming. Tell us what happened.
It is, Wolf. The missile was sent to Europe for training and on its way back to the U.S. was inadvertently got misrouted to Havana, Cuba. And despite the historic warming in relations between the U.S. and Cuba over the last year, sensitive American weapons technology is still in the hands of this once sworn enemy.
An inactive Hellfire missile sent last year to Europe for training mistakenly shipped to, of all places, Cuba. The missile, called a Hellfire captive air training missile, was not operational, and it wasn't fitted with a warhead. The live version is generally shot from helicopters to targets on the ground in combat, and most recently from Predator drones in counterterrorism operations in places like Yemen. The dummy version that made its way to Cuba still contains sensitive technology, such as sensor and targeting information the U.S. does not want falling into the wrong hands. The manufacturer of the missile sent it from Orlando, Florida, to Spain for a NATO training exercise. Instead of making its scheduled return from Madrid to Germany and then back to Orlando, the missile was wrongly put on a flight from Madrid to Paris and on to Havana. Sources familiar with the matter say the company realized the mistake and immediately notified the U.S. government. U.S. officials have been trying to get the missile back for more than a year, amid a historic thaw with Cuba in which the U.S. restored ties and reopened its embassy in Havana. But despite the better relations, the U.S. missile and its high-tech secrets are still in Cuban hands.
Well, listen, I think you can tell based on what I have read that this is an issue that the administration takes very, very seriously, I think for quite obvious reasons.
And as the State Department tries to get the missile returned to the U.S., the Justice Department is leading an investigation into what happened, along with the Department of Homeland Security, to make sure the missile was not stolen as part of a crime or espionage. Sources say the manufacturer of the missile did this by the book, got the appropriate licenses, and is cooperating with U.S. authorities. Wolf, tonight, Cuban officials are not commenting.
They're not commenting, but for a year now, the U.S. has been improving dramatically, historically, the relationship with Cuba, went ahead and reestablished full diplomatic relations, opened a U.S. embassy in Havana, and the Cubans have still refused to return that missile to the United States, and the administration went ahead with all of this despite that?
Well, Wolf, I think that part of the reason is, there's been this kind of flurry of diplomatic activity. They've been negotiating these warming of ties and a lot of other things. You saw that there was an aviation agreement negotiated recently. And I think, some people that are familiar with the matter say they're not sure if it's that the Cubans don't want to give it back or that the U.S. diplomats that have been focusing on this warming of ties didn't want to rock the boat and haven't been focusing on this. But they're optimistic that they will get that missile back, Wolf.
Elise, thanks very much. We're back with Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. She's a member of the Armed Services Foreign Affairs Committee and Iraq War veteran. Are you okay with the U.S. dramatically improving relations with Cuba for the past year and not getting this, at least getting this missile back from Cuba?
Well, there's so much about this story and this reality that concerns me. First of all, the fact that they've been trying to get this happened a year ago. This is the first time, really, we're hearing about that we have one of our missiles that was mistakenly sent to Cuba. The thing that is the bottom line in this is the lack of accountability. And I think this is part of a bigger problem that we have in our government, this culture of a lack of accountability where people can, waste trillions of taxpayer dollars, we can start wars, we can lose weapons. No one is held accountable at the end of the day. So the fact that it happened over a year ago, no one knows yet who is responsible, how it happened, and that we haven't gotten it back yet. It's crazy.
Because the criticism of the administration is sort of like the criticism of the administration on the Iran nuclear deal. There are 4 or 5 Americans who are still being held captive in Iran right now. The U.S. couldn't even get them returned in exchange for the nuclear deal with Iran. The U.S., in exchange for full diplomatic relations with Cuba, couldn't even get this missile back. And people will say, well, where's the negotiating skill?
Yeah, well, I would question so many things that happen in this whole track. Just in the articles that I've read, seeing that it's taken so long even to figure out what happened because diplomatic communications sometimes take years. That's completely unacceptable. This is a key piece of weaponry that the United States uses frequently against our enemies, and to have this misrouted and not returned directly back to our soil after it was used for training is completely unacceptable, and those responsible should be found and should be held accountable.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous when
It
you think
is.
a missile, Hellfire missile, which the U.S. uses very often to target terrorists, whether in Yemen or Afghanistan or Iraq or any place else, all of a sudden winds up in Cuba. Who knows what the Cubans have done with it? Let's talk a little bit more about what happened in Philadelphia today, the arrest of this individual who claims he was working for the Islamic State. Mike McCall, a man you know, the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, he says flatly, and I'm quoting him now, in effect, in my judgment, this individual was carrying out orders coming from Raqqa, Syria, from ISIS. Raqqa, the capital of the so-called Islamic State Caliphate. This is a man who's obviously well briefed. Do you have any information to back that up?
I haven't heard that information directly firsthand. It wouldn't surprise me, though, if that were true. And again, I think you've got to look at this unconventional enemy that we're facing. This is about how ISIS, Al-Qaeda, these other groups who are operating the other side of the planet have an incredible reach here, directly on our soil, directly through the internet, through social media, and are not only recruiting, but are instigating these types of attacks, creating this very direct threat to the American people on our soil, which is why I've been saying over and over again, it's so critical for us to shut down those open channels on social media where they're able to have access to, the average Joe walking down the street here in the United States.